I just transformed this old backyard shed into a home gym. Now to get this space into a much more inviting area, I did some framing, a lot of cleanup, had bulk material items delivered from Lowe's so I could get to plenty of insulation, along with drywall which included installation, mudding, and of course sanding and painting. All the hard work to get it to this point was covered in my previous video, but we still have plenty of work to be done. One of the nicest things about this shed transformation into a gym was that it was already pre-wired, so I didn't have to do any electrical other than replacing these light fixtures. These light fixtures certainly were very generic, and the more concerning part from my perspective is that they could easily be hit with a weight or something else while performing some type of physical activity in this gym. So I decided to replace them all with this flush-mounted light system by Project Source. It's also an LED system, so I don't have to worry about any light bulbs breaking over the course of its lifespan. And just remember, always make sure you turn off the breaker before you mess with any electrical, and then turn it back on to test it first, which I did. These lights were much more aesthetically pleasing, and the only difficulty I had was just trying to get all the wires back into the box after securing the mounting bracket onto the box. But we were able to get it done, and away we went with the other 5 lights, which took really no time at all, especially since we had the added advantage of having the breaker box in the same room in which I was working, which is not the norm in most circumstances. With the lights in, I made my way down to the floor, and before I start installing our flooring, I decided to apply a coat to all the concrete in this room. This is Blue Max by Ames, and it's a liquid rubber waterproofing membrane. Now, full disclosure is that I've worked with products like this in the past with varying results, but I saw this product at a recent trade show and was extremely impressed with the elasticity of the product. We were literally able to stretch it beyond belief, and with their statement of having 900% elongation, it was quite impressive, so I figured I'd try it out and see how it was to personally work with. I applied it to all the vertical surfaces with a paintbrush, but when it came time for the concrete slab, I used my roller. Now the paint, as you can see, is extremely thick, and it comes out of the can like it's a container of Yoplait yogurt. But after I get it on the roller, it's very easy to work with and goes on basically exactly like a normal paint would. Now you might be asking yourself, why are you painting this floor, because aren't you just going to be covering over the space? Well, yes, but it's going to be twofold. One, it's just for an aesthetic application. I want this area to be perfectly clean and beautiful by the time I'm done with it, and a nice paint coat will always help. And 2, which is much more important, I want there to be a barrier in between this concrete and the interior substrate. That's because I've personally dealt with water intrusion issues in my own home, with water coming through the concrete slab and destroying things that were on the interior of the home, and I certainly don't want that to happen on this project, so I am going to apply this and make sure that we have a nice quality barrier in between the concrete and finished floor. As for application, we're applying 2 coats to the floor and 3 coats for the vertical walls, just because they were a little bit more intensive to try and get to a pure white, which I didn't have to worry about a pure white when it came to the flooring, because the flooring is just going to be covered up.
Now, before we get to the flooring, we got to install some roofing material. Now, instead of doing drywall, which would have taken quite a bit of time and effort, and instead of insulation, which would have cost more money, we were going with a alternative version, which is more of a reflective sheathing by Reflectix. Now this product has an R rating of 7.5, which is not a tremendous amount, but it's still something versus just having it wide open to the elements. And therefore we also can cover up some unsightly items on the roof as well with this product. So let's get it cut and installed properly.
In terms of installation, it doesn't get more simple than a staple gun, and that's all I use for application. The hard part is just getting it into position and wiggling myself around all of these framing members. With one side in, I stretch it taut and install the opposite side, making sure it is as straight as possible, and then start stapling it in position in the middle and working my way towards the wall. At points, it's more of a feel around game, just trying to find your roof joists, but it's simple enough, and I use staples that are as long as possible for this staple gun, which in this case are 1/2 inch deep. Now, if you haven't seen this material before, it's used very often in post-frame applications along with metal building applications. So if you have a metal roof, barn, and so forth, and you want another layer of barrier to make sure we increase our R value in those applications, this product is for those areas, but they're also used for retrofit areas such as your own attic space in your home. Of course, I'm not just going to cover up our beautiful skylights, which will eventually be cleaned, I assure you, at the end of this video, but I left approximately 2 inches of extra insulation on the interior edges and then just folded it up onto the framing and stapled it in place. Don't worry, I'm not going to leave it like this, I am going to trim around it, but before then, I wanted to know, what do you guys think of this type of application? I understand that this application is not for everyone, but it was a really good alternative to drywall, especially when considering this is just a shed and noting how much money the client saved because of the labor portion would have taken to install drywall versus this material. In order to cover up that weird jagged insulation edge, I picked up some primed MDF boards, cut it to size, and then started installing that around the perimeter of our skylights. As far as securing these boards to the surrounding framework, I'm just using a 16 gauge framing nailer with 1.5 inch long nails. This is a very easy way to finish off the overall aesthetic to this roof, and something so simple can really make a difference in the long run with the overall enjoyment of this space that hopefully the client spends plenty of time in. With our trim work finished off on the ceiling, we might as well work our way down to our window trim. But before we do that, we need to properly insulate around the window by applying some great stuff insulation for windows and doors. Now, this product is specifically for those areas because they don't have a large amount of expansion comparatively to other cans, which you don't want because you don't want to damage or bow out your door or window at this time. Our door might be resting on a concrete slab, but you would be surprised by how little space insects need to get into a space. So what I like to do is I still like to apply a bit of this spray foam to get into those cracks and crevices just to make sure that there's no air barrier along with any ability for insects to get in at this location. With our spray foam in, I let it cure, and once cured, I cut off any excess and start immediately with our trim work. I'm using the same 3.5 inch wide primed MDF trim that I used in the ceiling, but since this is going to be a much more visible space, I'm going to up the ante on how we finish off these windows. With all of our MDF cut, I draw a line on the back side to determine how much we need to cut off in order for those pieces to be flush with our drywall. I bring these boards over to my table saw and set the correct depth to make sure that we cut off the exact amount needed at every single side. Once this is done for all 4 boards, I bring them back to the window and start the installation process. When installing, you may notice that I'm placing the cut edge towards me, and that's for good reason because that cut side is perfectly straight and it's going to be unseen because there's going to be a mitered picture frame box of trim around this after we install this trim. In order for our picture frame to line up perfectly, I take the inside measurement on both the top and bottom, then go out to our table saw, get our table saw set up to a 45-degree mark, cut both sides, making sure that narrow inside portion of our picture frame matches up with the inside measurement that we took previously, and then nail them down in position. With both the top and bottom end, I can easily measure both sides, but this measurement will be the long outer points of our mitered edge, not our interior mitered edge, which does make for easier measuring and cutting. Then we just proceed to nailing the final 2 pieces together, and we can move on to the next window. We obviously have to repeat this process 2 more times because we have 2 more windows, but let's just say the second 2 were much easier to install than the first because we found our groove after the first. Since we're working our way from top to bottom, from ceiling to floor, we might as well get to our flooring.
Now it's finally time for some flooring. I wanted to introduce you to the product that we're going to be using. On this project, we are going to be going with Project Source, these interlocking tiles that are 20 inches by 20 inches. Now, the really nice thing about this product is that they're rubber. They're not foam, it's a rubber base, and it's a much more durable product. You see a lot of those cheap foam materials in gyms, but we want to go a little above and beyond on this project, which is why we're going to go with a rubber product that is still interlocking. So installation should be actually quite easy.
After all this hard work of getting this shed up to snuff, it is really nice and satisfying to get to this point and having a floor system that goes in so quickly and easily. This interlocking system makes it a breeze, and it really is quite straightforward in terms of how you install it from tile to tile to tile. Now, each one of these tiles can be installed with just your hands, but I did find it much easier to grab a rubber mallet and then hammer them into position. Now, I'm not hammering hard, just a few taparoos on each panel, and away you go to the next one. Now, of course, inevitably, you're going to come to a point where you're going to need to cut one of these tiles down if you're doing a full room. So I grab a sharp utility blade, cut off any of the excess, and then lay it down and snap it into place as I would normally do. Because these tiles have a unique stabilizing pattern on the backside, I found that it was easier to cut if I flipped the tiles over, along with noting that we want to make sure we have a barrier on the bottom and the top to make sure that we not only straight, but we also have something soft to cut into, not just concrete. From here on out, it's just the same process over and over and over again, which means it's a perfect time to say a huge thank you to the sponsor of this week's video, Lowe's. Now, they were obviously the sponsor of part 1 of this video series, so it's only fair to have them in the culmination video as well. All materials and tools that you see in this video can be purchased at your local Lowe's or at lowes.com. And the fun special caveat to some of these materials, including the flooring, is that they're under the Lowe's in-house brand called Project Source. Now, these specific products are known for their affordability, functionality, and reliable solutions for not only gym areas, but kitchens, bathrooms, and all other places around your home. I'll have links for every single one of these tools and materials listed in the description of this video, so if you want to check it out for yourself, make sure you do. But till then, let's get back to the video. Our flooring on the opposite side of the room almost fit near perfectly without even needing to cut, but there was a small section that did need to be cut on this side, which was easily taken care of with our utility blade, and as you can see, fits quite snugly against that wall. With our flooring completely installed, I can move on to finishing off this room with some wall base. Now, with this space being a shed/gym, I felt it was more appropriate to use a rubber wall base, not only because of the ease of installation, but also it's much more durable and easier to clean over time, which is definitely needed in a gym. I apply 2 heavy beads of a rubber base sealant. Now, this sealant is specifically designed for rubber wall base, so make sure you get that product because it tacks up very quickly and you don't want any of this wall base to move once it's installed. With wall base in around the entire perimeter, I can move on to finishing our trim work. Now, I did hold off on the door trim because I wanted that to be butted right up against our flooring, which of course I waited until the flooring was actually in. With our door trim in, I can move on to my last and final piece of trim in terms of where it's being located, and that's actually going to be right up against our ceiling. I did feel that leaving that attic reflective roll insulation as a bare edge at this location was a bit unprofessional, so I wanted to make sure that we clean it up with some simple trim that matches our existing trim. When I have a butt-to-butt joint, I tend to try and avoid a 90-degree angle at this location. A 45-degree miter really does provide a much more stable base, and I find that it's a lot less likely to crack over time, based upon my personal experience. When it comes time to filling all of our nail holes along with all of our mitered edges, the one product that I tend to go back to most is a water putty from Durham. Now, this is a product that comes in a powder form. All you need to do is add water to it, mix it up a bit, and apply it to basically anything that needs to be filled. It is a 3-to-1 ratio, so 3 parts powder to 1 part water, and it does dry quite quickly. But the best part about it is that after it's applied, dried, you would sand it just like you would do with any piece of wood. Plus, it can fill small little holes as you see here, but it also can fill much larger holes if you so need it. Once the product is fully cured, I come back with my random orbital sander with 220 grit sandpaper and sand all those areas smooth. Now, this video may be 2 times the speed, but the sanding process of this material is extremely quick, and I'm able to get through this entire room very efficiently, which I do appreciate because the next 2 steps are not as quick, let's just say. As a general reminder as well is that I do have my sander hooked up to my shop vac, so the vast majority of all that dust is being captured, so I don't have to worry about breathing it in. Now before we get to paint, we do need to caulk a few areas. I personally like the Dynaflex Ultra because this is more used for exterior applications, but personally I find it's very nice to use around windows because it's not only very easy to clean up because it's a latex caulk, but it also dries very fast and can be painted in a mere hour or two after application. Plus, because it is meant for exterior use, it is more of a durable product than you see in your standard caulks for interior use, which I of course appreciate, but I also don't like to use caulk for exterior use in any case. I need something more durable than that, but for this application, it's perfect. With our trim finally ready for paint, you could go with your standard wall paint that I applied earlier, but in this application, I'm going to be going with an interior and exterior paint by Sherwin-Williams for door and trim specifically. These areas tend to need more paint durability over time, and you seemingly get a better, smoother finish than your standard wall paint as well, which is very nice, especially when it comes to brush marks. This paint also comes in the ultra white base coat that I use for the walls, but just in a different sheen, which I am going to be using a semi-gloss because not only will it stand out more, but it will be more durable as well. I'm surprised I went this long without a lock on this door, but this is a shed in the backyard, which I figured was going to be safe enough for all the materials and tools in this area. But before I put the door locks on, we have to make sure we set the door first, specifically the door that does not have the latch on it, and that's because there's two prongs on a French door, one at the bottom and one at the very top. We have to drill holes for those prongs that can now fit into the casing, and in order to know exactly where those holes need to be placed, I'm using my ox pencil with a red crayon tip to mark the very point of that prong. That way I'm able to push it down onto the casing and know exactly where that hole needs to be placed for the door to shut properly. This way, that side door will stay shut unless inevitably we need to open both doors when we move in some larger equipment. As for the door lock itself, we're going with a Schlage combo kit with deadbolts, so it's probably a little bit of overkill for this application, but inevitably the client did want a deadbolt, so we had one installed just in case. It probably would have eternally bugged me if I just left these old outlets with a brand new plate cover, so I did go back to Lowe's, picked up some outlets and a light switch to transform them into something that actually looks brand new and clean. So yeah, that extra little effort makes a difference in my book because that would have just been an eyesore on a completely white wall. As I finish up inside, I make my way outside, and I do have a slight overhang with our roof eaves here, which I do want to cover up because I don't want any type of rodent, bird, or insect come into this space and find their own little home. However, I do want this space to be able to breathe, so in order to do so and still make sure it's completely closed off, I install this simple little 3-inch vent in these locations all the way across our roof rafters. The client will be caulking and painting these areas because they wanted my focus to be on the interior portion, but I figured I wanted to make sure you saw how we closed this area off, but still allowed breathability. And finally, the last item that I couldn't wait to personally do was to clean off these old, sad skylights. Yeah, as you can see, they were quite disgusting, and pressure washing is just so satisfying to me, so this was certainly a joy to finish off this amazing transformation from a shed to a gym. But for this to be a completely done project, we need some gym equipment. This space truly does feel brand new again, and as just a reminder of what it looked like before, yeah, that was a bit rough and definitely very much a shed, but as you can see now, an amazing transformation. And if you stuck with me till the end, I will let you know that there was so many people that did say that they want to see one built from the ground up, so I have already one in the works. It's happening this summer, so stay tuned for that. But till then, this is truly one beautiful, sexy beast of a backyard home gym that was a shed. Oh yeah,